Tokyo, June 14th, 1941. Rain lashes against the narrow alleys of the Azabu district, turning the neon glow of late-night bars into streaks of distorted light across wet cobblestones. Inside a smoke-filled apartment above a German newspaper office, a man with steel-grey eyes leans over a typewriter. Each key strikes like a heartbeat, urgent, deliberate, prophetic. His name is Richard Sorge, a journalist by cover, a spy by truth. A colonel in Soviet military intelligence, though no one in Tokyo suspects it. Officially, he works for the Frankfurter Zeitung, the respected mouthpiece of Nazi Germany. Unofficially, he serves a far more dangerous master, the GRU, Soviet military intelligence headquartered in Moscow. Sorge's cigarette burns low as he rereads the cable he's preparing to send through his radio operator, Max Clausen. The message is simple, yet seismic. Confirmed. German invasion of the Soviet Union imminent. Date expected, June 22nd. He knows what he's writing could change the course of the war, or cost him his life. The air smells of ozone and tobacco, the faint hum of the radio in the next room mixing with the steady tap of rain against the window. Sorge glances at the small portrait of Stalin pinned above his desk. Not out of admiration, but obligation. He's warned Moscow before about German troop movements, about Hitler's growing hostility toward the USSR, and been met with silence. Paranoia clouds reason in the Kremlin, he thinks grimly. But this time, the evidence is beyond doubt. Weeks of intercepted conversations, diplomatic whispers, and reports from his German contacts, especially Colonel Eugen Ott, the German ambassador to Japan, have painted the truth in blood-red certainty. The Wehrmacht is preparing for Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. As Sorge finishes typing, Clausen emerges from the adjoining room, adjusting his headphones. "Ready?" he asks quietly. Sorge nods. "Send it. Priority channel." Outside, thunder cracks across the Tokyo skyline, nature's warning of a storm that mirrors the one gathering in Europe. Clausen tunes the transmitter, fingers trembling, slightly as he taps out the coded message on his telegraph key. The signal leaps invisibly across thousands of miles, cutting through static and interference, until it reaches Soviet receivers deep in the heart of Moscow. Inside the Kremlin's grey labyrinth, Sorge's transmission is logged, decoded, and filed among hundreds of others. Analysts mark it as unverified. A copy lands on Joseph Stalin's desk. The dictator scans it briefly, frowning. Then, almost dismissively, he scrawls a note in the margin. Disinformation, British provocation. And just like that, Sorge's warning, the one that could save millions of Soviet lives, is ignored. Back in Tokyo, Sorge pours himself a drink, vodka smuggled in through the embassy. The glass trembles slightly in his hand. He stares into it, as if trying to read the future in its reflection. The rain outside grows heavier, and with it comes the echo of distant artillery, not real yet, but inevitable. He turns to Clausen. "If they don't believe me," he says quietly, "then the next message I send will be written in blood." The two men sit in silence, listening to the steady patter of rain. In the far distance, somewhere beyond the sea, German panzers idle, like predators in the dark, waiting for the signal to strike east. Sorge lights another cigarette, watching the flame flicker in the dim light. He doesn't know it yet, but within a week his prophecy will come true, and the Soviet Union will be caught unprepared in the jaws of a war unlike any the world has ever seen. The storm he warned about is already on the horizon. June 21st, 1941, Moscow. Night falls heavy over the Kremlin. The air hangs thick with cigarette smoke and tension, the kind that seeps into walls and lingers in men's bones. In Stalin's office, the only light comes from the red glow of a desk lamp and the faint shimmer of maps stretched across a vast oak table. Lines and arrows mark the western frontier, Belarus, Ukraine, the Baltic states, the fragile skin of the Soviet Union. Reports flood in by the hour. Reconnaissance planes have spotted German troop concentrations along the border. Deserting Polish peasants whisper of tanks massing in forests. But Stalin sits motionless, his eyes cold, his moustache shadowed under the lamp. He grinds a cigarette. Into an ashtray overflowing with spent butts and mutters, "Hitler will not attack." Not yet. At the far end of the table, Marshal Zhukov shifts uneasily. "Comrade Stalin, the information from Sorge is precise, down to the date." Stalin doesn't look up. "Sorge," he scoffs. "That German drunkard in Tokyo. He's been compromised by the fascists or by the British. They want us to fire first," Zhukov presses on. "But if he's right, the entire Western Front will collapse before we can respond." Stalin's glare cuts him off like a blade. "Enough! Hitler is not a fool. He knows war on two fronts is suicide. You'll see, this is another deception." Zhukov swallows his protest. He knows better than to argue. Others have vanished for less. Across the city, in a small GRU listening post, Sorge's cable is archived, filed away with a note, unsubstantiated. The operators don't know that within 24 hours, the Wehrmacht will unleash 3 million men, 3,000 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft upon their homeland. Meanwhile, Tokyo, the same night. Richard Sorge sits in the Roppongi Club, a favorite haunt of diplomats and military officers. The jazz band plays softly, the sound of a saxophone winding through the clinking of glasses and murmured conversation. Sorge leans back in his chair, perfectly composed, as two German officers laugh nearby. One of them, Colonel Ott, the ambassador himself, leans over and says, "You know, Sorge, the Führer is about to teach the Russians a lesson they'll never forget." Sorge forces a tight smile, swirling his whiskey. "Is that so?" Ott chuckles. "By tomorrow morning, the Red Army won't exist." Sorge's heart stutters, not in surprise but in confirmation. He has spent months piecing together fragments of conversation, troop movements, coded telegrams. Now, at last, the final piece clicks into place. He drains his glass, sets it down gently, and excuses himself. Outside, the night air is thick and humid. Neon signs flicker through the mist. He walks quickly back to his safe house, every footstep echoing like a countdown. Inside, Clausen is already at the radio, waiting. "More news?" Sorge nods. "It begins at dawn." Clausen hesitates. "Should we send another message?" Sorge exhales slowly. "It won't matter now." He lights a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. Weary, hardened, but still defiant. They won't believe it until they see the fire themselves. Far away, in the forests of eastern Poland, the German 4th Panzer Army sits silent. Engines idle under camouflage nets. Tank crews wait for orders, helmets in hand. The eastern sky is beginning to pale. The last night of peace is ending. As the clock strikes 3:15 a.m., Moscow time, the first shells scream across the border. The ground shakes. German bombers streak overhead, engines roaring. Within hours, entire Soviet airfields are burning, hundreds of planes destroyed before they ever leave the ground. In Moscow, telephones ring unanswered. Chaos ripples through the command centers. Stalin, awakened in disbelief, can only whisper, "Hitler betrayed us." And in Tokyo, Richard Sorge stares out his window at the grey dawn. He already knows what the world will wake to, and that no one, not even his own country, will remember that he tried to stop it. June 22nd, 1941, Western Soviet Union. The world explodes at dawn. Across 1,000 kilometers of front, the sky is torn apart by fire and steel. The thunder of artillery drowns out the morning birds, and the horizon burns red as the first wave of the Wehrmacht surges east. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's most ambitious gamble, has begun. At the border near Brest-Litovsk, Soviet sentries are still rubbing the sleep from their eyes when the first shells land. A young private, Alexei Petrov, stumbles from his barracks, clutching his rifle. The earth shudders beneath his boots. He looks toward the western tree line, a wall of smoke and flame. Within seconds, the radio tower collapses under the barrage. Across the river, German troops in grey uniforms move with ruthless precision. Tanks roll forward through the mist, treads grinding the earth to mud. The black crosses on their flanks gleam in the morning light. Luftwaffe dive bombers howl overhead, their sirens a mechanical scream that freezes men in terror. By mid-morning, the Soviet frontier defenses are disintegrating. Command posts are cut off, telephone lines severed. In the chaos, units fight blindly, unsure who's alive or dead. Back in Moscow, the news spreads like wildfire, disbelief giving way to panic. Telegrams pour in, Vilnius lost, Minsk encircled, entire divisions destroyed. Stalin sits in stunned silence, pale and motionless. Around him, generals argue, maps scatter, orders contradict. "Mobilize everything," Zhukov demands. "The front must be stabilized." But the Red Army isn't ready. Half its aircraft are obsolete. Its commanders have been purged, its soldiers undertrained. Stalin's refusal to believe Sorge's warning has left the nation blind. Meanwhile, Tokyo. Sorge listens to the broadcast. From Berlin, in a crowded cafe, German officers raise their glasses, cheering Hitler's crusade against Bolshevism. The radio crackles with triumph. The German army advances rapidly on all fronts. Soviet resistance collapsing. He sits motionless, the smoke from his cigarette curling upward like a funeral veil. The irony is unbearable. He had warned them precisely, and yet they ignored him. Clausen finds him later that night, eyes hollow. "Moscow knows now," he says quietly. Sorge nods. Too late. They'll lose millions before they learn. The next weeks prove him right. Entire Soviet armies are encircled in the great pockets of Białystok and Smolensk. Prison columns stretch for miles. Exhausted men, barefoot, faces caked in dust. Villages burn behind them. The Wehrmacht surges toward Moscow at a speed no one thought possible. In Berlin, Hitler is euphoric. "We have only to kick in the door," he boasts, "and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." But even as German victory seems certain, Sorge is already studying new cracks in the facade. His mind works relentlessly, observing Japan's political circles, eavesdropping at embassy dinners, gauging where Tokyo will strike next. One evening, at a dinner party hosted by Colonel Ott, he overhears a quiet conversation between Japanese generals. One says, "Our army will strike south, the Americans and British colonies, not north against the Soviets." Sorge doesn't show a flicker of reaction, but inside, the revelation ignites him. If Japan turns south, the Soviet Far East will be safe. Stalin could move his Siberian divisions west, the same elite troops that might one day save Moscow. For all the betrayal, all the disbelief, Richard Sorge knows his mission isn't over. His next message might yet change the war, if Moscow is willing to listen this time. He returns to his apartment that night, Tokyo shimmering outside his window. He sits before the radio again, cigarette in one hand, pen in the other. The flame of his lighter flickers. "Fragile but unbroken. Let's begin," he says to Clausen. Tokyo, September 1941. The cicadas scream outside as the last heat of summer lingers over the city. In the German embassy compound, uniforms gleam and laughter echoes, diplomats and military attachés toasting the unstoppable victories of the Reich. But inside a quiet backroom of that same embassy, one man sits apart, listening more than he speaks. Richard Sorge's eyes flick toward a group of Japanese officers huddled near the corner, voices low but urgent. Through cigarette, smoke and clinking glasses, he catches a few key phrases: Southern strategy, Dutch East Indies, American embargo. Every word sharpens the picture forming in his mind. Hours later, he walks home through the rain, trench coat collar up, footsteps splashing through puddles on the cobblestones. His face is unreadable, but his pulse races. The implications are monumental. Japan has chosen to strike south, against the Western colonies and the US, not north into Siberia. That decision will change everything. Inside his safe house, Sorge bursts through the door. Clausen, he says, we have to send this now, tonight. Clausen, already at the transmitter, looks up. What's the message? Sorge grabs a pencil and scrawls on a pad of paper. Confirmed, Japan will not attack USSR this year. Focus. On southern expansion. Siberian border secure. Recommend troop redeployment west. The words are few, but the meaning is immense. If Stalin believes it, he can strip his Far Eastern divisions, some of his best-trained, best-equipped soldiers, and rush them to defend Moscow before it's too late. Clausen nods, beginning to tap out the code. The rhythmic click, click, click fills the small room. Sorge leans against the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. He feels a flicker of hope, faint but real. Somewhere in Moscow, perhaps, someone will finally listen. Moscow, October 1941. Snow falls early this year, soft flakes drifting down over a city trembling with fear. The Germans are less than 100 kilometers from the capital. Refugees flood the streets, hauling carts and bundles of whatever they could carry. The sound of artillery echoes faintly from the west, like distant thunder rolling closer each night. In a dimly lit intelligence office, Sorge's latest transmission is decoded and handed to the Kremlin. This time, the response is different. Stalin reads it slowly, his expression shifting. Not disbelief, but calculation. Japan will not attack, he murmurs, tapping the paper with a thick finger. He looks up at his generals. Transfer the Siberian divisions, all of them. The order moves through the Soviet command chain like an electric current. Across the Far East, trains begin to roll west. Thousands of men in white camouflage, hardened by years of brutal winters, their breath fogging in the icy air. They travel for weeks through endless snow, past villages, forests, and frozen rivers, toward a single destination, Moscow. By December, those same divisions, the men Sorge's message freed, will stand in the trenches outside the capital. As the German offensive stalls in the bitter cold, they will counterattack with savage precision, driving the Wehrmacht back from the gates of the city. The tide of the war will begin to turn. And in Tokyo, Richard Sorge hears the news through intercepted German dispatches. The Soviets have held. Moscow has not fallen. For the first time in months, he allows himself a thin, weary smile. He has saved the city, and perhaps the Soviet Union, without firing a shot. But as he looks out across the city skyline, that night, he feels a cold certainty settle in his chest. The web he's woven, so intricate, so delicate, is beginning to fray. The Gestapo is watching, and whispers of betrayal are spreading. The hunter has become the hunted. Tokyo, October 18th, 1941. Morning sunlight filters weakly through the curtains of Richard Sorge's apartment. For a moment, everything is still. The faint hum of the city beyond the window, the ticking of a wall clock, the whisper of wind through the paper screens. Then comes the sound that shatters it all. Heavy boots pounding up the stairwell. Sorge stiffens. His cigarette trembles slightly between his fingers. He knows that sound. The Tokubetsu Koto Keisatsu, Japan's special hire police, before. He can reach for the radio. The door bursts open. Plainclothes officers flood the room, shouting in Japanese. Sorge raises his hands slowly, almost calmly. Behind him, Clausen freezes beside the transmitter. Mid-message, the code unfinished. The lead officer steps forward. "Richard Sorge," he says coldly, "you are under arrest for espionage." Sorge exhales, a faint smirk ghosting across his face. "Took you long enough." They find everything, the cipher sheets, the coded notebooks, even the hidden radio transmitter embedded in a desk drawer. Years of invisible work laid bare in an instant. Clausen is dragged away, shouting in German. Sorge is handcuffed, shoved against the wall, and led down the stairs into the waiting car. The city watches as he disappears into the grey morning, the man who knew the secrets of empires now silenced by one of them. In the interrogation cells of Sugamo prison, time dissolves into pain and flickering light. Sorge endures weeks of brutal questioning, beatings, sleep deprivation, endless accusations. The Japanese interrogators know he is dangerous, but they don't yet understand how deeply his roots run. "Who do you work for?" they demand. Sorge smiles through bloodied lips. "I told you, the Frankfurter Zeitung. I write about politics, not wars." But when they confront him with the evidence, the radio, the codes, Clausen's confession, he finally speaks. Not with defiance, but with eerie composure. "Yes," he admits, "I am a member of Soviet military intelligence. I informed Moscow of the German invasion before it happened." The interrogators exchange stunned glances. His words are unbelievable, almost absurd. The German journalist, a Soviet spy. Yet the proof lies all around them. In the weeks that follow, Sorge's story becomes a quiet obsession for the Japanese authorities. The Germans, horrified and embarrassed, demand his execution. The Soviets, they deny knowing him. When Tokyo contacts Moscow through diplomatic channels, offering to exchange Sorge for a Japanese prisoner, the response from Stalin's government is chillingly brief. The name Richard Sorge is unknown to us. The betrayal cuts deeper than any interrogation. After all he had done, after saving Moscow itself, his own country has erased him. 2 years later, in Sugamo prison yard, the morning of November 7th, 1944, dawns grey and silent. Sorge stands before the gallows, calm and upright, his hands bound. The guards are uneasy. Even now the prisoner carries himself like a soldier. A priest offers him a final prayer, but he declines. "I have nothing to confess," he says softly. "I only regret that I could not do more for peace." As the noose is placed around his neck, he looks to the sky, pale light breaking through the clouds, and whispers, "Long live the Red Army." The trapdoor falls, and with it, the man who saw the storm coming and was ignored passes into history. Decades later, after Stalin's death, the Soviet Union finally acknowledges him. In 1964, Richard Sorge is posthumously awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. His photograph hangs in museums, his reports studied by historians, his warnings finally recognized for what they were, not the ramblings of a spy, but the foresight of a man who understood the nature of power and the blindness of those who wield it. In the end, Sorge's greatest tragedy is also his legacy, that he was right too soon, and believed too deeply in a world that could not yet hear him. The rain returns to Tokyo, falling softly over the city that once hid him. Somewhere in the hum of the streets, the echo of his typewriter can still be heard, the sound of truth, written too late.